Tonight is the highlight of our bonsai year for the Cape Fear Bonsai Society. Arthur Joura comes down from Asheville, and as usual, Blaine and John have found some challenging material for him. We're working on camellias tonight. So before Arthur looks inside the tree and starts throwing branches at me, before he starts throwing branches at me, we'll turn the show over to him, and here we go.
Thank you, Mary. Always a pleasure to be in Wilmington. I really enjoy coming here. Today's ride was not too enjoyable.
Did you bring a tornado?
No, I brought the hurricane. I rode through one today, or I'm telling everybody it was. And if it wasn't a hurricane, it's as close to one as I care to drive in. It was pretty shaky. When you're going down an interstate and you've got your wipers on full speed and you're going 35 miles an hour and passing everybody, you know it's a bad day on the road. But that was then, this is now. I'm glad to be here, and I thank all of you for coming out in less than charming weather to be here. I want to thank Mary, too, for handling things and setting me up. She sent me a photo of this piece of plant material.
I said, run.
Well, what she said was that John and Blaine picked it out and then left town.
Oh, there was the clue right there.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's not bad. I don't think. I can't really see much of it yet. But it looks serviceable, you know, and not really that much of a challenge, because most of everything that you can see from where you're sitting is going to get taken off. Because right now it's a shrub. It's intended to go into somebody's home landscape, right? It's not received any prior bonsai training. And so the first step when you use material like this and you're going to make a bonsai out of it, the first step is that all kinds of stuff gets cut off. That's how it is. And to be completely honest, camellia is not something I have a great deal of experience with. We don't have any camellia in the Arboretum's collection. And of course they wouldn't grow out in the landscape where I'm from. It's too cold there. But they're fine here, and certainly a beautiful plant. And I went ahead and refreshed my knowledge as to how to grow these and what you can do to them and what you can't do to them. So I think we'll be fine. But I want to tell everybody right up front that the end result of tonight is not going to look good, you know? The plant looks better now than it's going to look when I'm done with it. And that's just because so much is going to be taken away. And of course, all these nice flower buds here, and it's loaded with them, not one of them has a hope. Sorry. Let me step aside here just for a minute to make this point. These are not camellias, obviously. These are red maples. Yeah, here's the front of this one. Right, these are red maples that grew virtually from seed. About 8 years ago, 9 years ago, a man who was volunteering with me at the time said, "Hey, do you want some red maple seedlings?" And I said, "Sure." And he walked out to his car, and he brought in a strip. Oh, it was 6 foot long. It was about 3 inches wide, and there must have been 1,000 red maple seedlings in that strip. I said, "Wow, where'd you get them?" And he said, "My neighbor's gutter." And we took a lot of them. I don't know how many. We grew a bunch of those. And these are the product of that. So these are each about 8 or 9 years old, roughly. You know, we're spitballing there, but that's about right. Okay? Same age. Came from the same parent tree. The difference is This one has been in a container all its life. And this one spent 3 or 4 years in the ground. All right? When you see a demonstration, most often you see something like this. Most often you see a plant that was bought at a nursery and it was intended for landscape use, and then it gets chopped, you know, mercilessly and stuffed into a bonsai pot, and that's your demonstration. I never ever do bonsai that way back at the shop. You know, that's not really the good way to go about it. But for the sake of a demonstration where, you know, you're trying to accomplish a lot in a small span of time and show a lot of the different steps that you're going to go through, we do it. But it's not ideal. And again, I would never do what I'm going to do to that plant tonight. I would never choose to do that under other circumstances. For a demonstration, yes, because it's expected and that's how we do it. This is how I like to grow material. Not always from seed, sometimes from cuttings, sometimes from nursery plants. But instead of doing everything all at once, you know, maybe the first thing you do is go in and pick out the main trunks you're going to keep and, you know, do some significant cuts, and then let the plant have a chance to recover. And then maybe later you go and you push back some of the branches to make them shorter and start, you know, roughing out the shape of that the bonsai is going to be eventually, and then you let the plant have some time to recover. And then maybe next year you go and you repot, and it doesn't go into a bonsai container, it goes into a container like half the size that it's in now. And you grow it for a year. And then the next year you get it into a bonsai pot. Step by step by step. And this is the best way to go. To ensure your success, to give the plant a better chance of survival. But again, everything's different in a demonstration. But if part of the reason why we do these is for educational reasons, then, you know, I want to make sure I tell you this is not the way you should do it all at once. But the things that I show you, they are the right techniques. You would just spread them out over a longer period of time. And if you want to work with younger plants, cuttings, seedlings and such, then do this. You know, put them in the ground. Otherwise, you know, it's a long-term project, 9 years. I don't know that everybody's going to be content after 9 years with this. But I don't mind it. You know, it's got a great base. It's got some interesting movement in it. Now, too, because I was growing, you know, 100 of these at one time, plus all the other plants that are in the collection, this does not get a lot of annual attention. You know, basically one time a year I'll go and cut it and repot it, and that's it. And the rest of the time of year, the most attention it gets is maybe water and fertilizer. Here's a younger plant here. It came from the same source, but this one is not as old. This one's only like 5 years old, 6 years old, something like that. And so it's further behind than this one is. But if somebody took this out of the pot and put it in the ground, they could have this in 3 years' time, if you grow correctly. All right. I brought this one as a giveaway, and I'll leave it up to you how you want to give it out. All right. Oh, by the way, you see big wounds. They're covered with cut paste. Here's one that's mostly covered over naturally, you know, with the callus material. But big wound, big. Another big one right here. The one I pointed out before, another one here, another one here, another big one here, big one here, big one here, and of course the branches. This is how you do it. You know, it grows, it looks like a big shrub in the ground. You look at it and it's, you know, this tree got up as tall as me, but it was all shrubby. These were big branches coming out just above the soil line. We let them grow because their presence is what built this big base. This is very desirable in a bonsai, right? For those of you who are maybe not doing it so long, that's what we want to see at the base of the tree. We want to see a big flare. And Nice display of roots going down into the ground. This plant maybe has it, probably not. It's got a pretty good base on it, but not that kind of taper, not the flare like this has, right? And that's there because I let these things grow. And then of course they get cut off, and then we have to wait for them to cover over because it looks kind of clunky like this. This plant probably has another 5 years before it goes into a bonsai pot and looks more or less like a bonsai should. From this point, the time in the ground was just to build this trunk. If you don't feel like you have that much time or that much patience, then you go for something more modest. There are other plants you can use that'll get to this point faster than this maple did. Chinese elms, good to use, Japanese maples, things that grow quickly. Back to the subject at hand though. I'm glad there's a big plant because I left my glasses at Ron's house. So, it's okay. I would like to take this out if somebody wouldn't mind just holding down the container. And you're going to sit in front. You're going to jump at these things. If you don't mind, just hold down the container. We'll see if it'll pop out for us. There it is. Thank you. Oh, let's see. Does it have the ants that I've come to expect from material that Blaine picks out for me? No.
They were exiled to another property. They came back on their planes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you know, one year we pulled out the plant that Blaine got, and like ants came boiling out.
He got it.
Thousands of them.
He got the plant.
Yeah. Is it still alive?
Yes.
That's a question.
It looks like this still.
Oh, hey, we don't have ants, but
Oh.
that's not what you want to see on the underside of your leaves. That's all right. Most of the leaves will be coming off. Okay, so it's very hard to see what's going on in here because you got all this stuff blocking the view. I can see a little bit better from up close. But as I said, much of this is going to come off. We can make a few preliminary cuts just to start opening it up a little bit so you can see better. Well, that's a catchy tune. Yeah. All right. I look down here. You know, I really don't know what way I'm going to go with it yet, but there are some things I can look at and say, you know, I'm really not going to use that. And here's one of them. It's just a little sprout coming up. Not going to be using that. Here's a branch. It's not like you wouldn't ever use a branch this low, but because it's so small and everything else around it is much bigger, being down low, we'd want it to be bigger than that. I can pretty reasonably be certain that that won't be needed. And this. A lot of times, you know, when I'm working at the Arboretum, people will come along, people who don't know anything about bonsai, and one of the common questions they'll ask is, how do you know what to cut off? How do you know what to cut off? And, you know, there isn't one simple answer for that. It's all based on your level of understanding, your level of experience, what you see in the plant, what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, there isn't a set answer like, oh, there are numbers on the branches, and you know, you look at the instruction sheet and cut off what it tells you to. It doesn't work like that. So, one way to get started is to look for things that seem unlikely to be kept. And you go through the process of elimination. You start taking off things that you can look at and say, you know, that's probably not usable. You might be wrong, but you have to start somewhere. So you look for the things that are most likely to be removed, and you go ahead and you snip them off. And sometimes just in the process of making a snip here and a snip there, you start getting into it, and you overcome that kind of natural hesitation you feel at the onset, where you look and you say, oh my gosh, where to begin? So you start off by doing little things, nibbling things, and you go for a feeling, you know. And at the same time, with each little snip that you make, you change things. And then you reassess and you look and see the effect of what you've done. And hopefully it doesn't make you feel bad. You look for the effect of it, and then that sometimes tells you what to do next. And here all I'm doing is nibbling, looking at things, shortening them. If I see something that looks like it's obviously in an awkward position or an unlikely place for being used, I'll go ahead and snip it off. Or at least shorten it. If you're not 100% sure, you know this plant is going to get smaller, so just go ahead and start chewing it from the outside in, you know? Snip, 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 and gradually you get to feel comfortable with it, and you kind of get in a groove, you know, where you're feeling more confident as you go along.
How do you preserve your tools so they don't rust?
These are stainless steel, so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't take much on my part. You don't put them up wet, that's one thing, and if you're cutting something that oozes a lot of sap, like a ficus, you always go ahead and clean it off when you're done. You can put a light coat of oil on them too, WD-40 or something like that. All right, so now you're beginning to be able to look in and see, and here's what I'm seeing, more of that. All right, those are aphids. Not something we want, you know. When you're at the nursery and you're looking, that's something that I pay attention to. It wouldn't necessarily mean like, oh, I'm not going to buy this plant, but it's something to take note of, because in some cases it may be enough to make you say, no, that's not a good plant to invest in because it's obviously got some problems. When plants get insects, disease, it's usually a sign that they're unhealthy in other ways. You know? Maybe they dried out too much at some point. Or maybe it's pot-bound. Insects and disease tend to affect plants that are under a certain level of stress. Just like with people, you know, people often get sick when they're stressed out. Same with plants. When they get stressed, it leads to bad things. So you pay attention to that when you're selecting your plant material, because always you ideally want to work with healthy plants. Because what we do in bonsai is so stressful, you know, taking away, that if the plant is weak to begin with, all that taking away is going to really knock it back. So I know the person who picked this plant out isn't here. But maybe somebody will tell them when they see them next time. They'll say, hey, you know that plant that you picked out for Arthur to work on? Crawling with aphids.
As opposed to ants.
Yeah.
Arthur, does the size of the leaves on the plant influence what you see the plant becoming?
It can, because if a plant has a larger sized leaf, it kind of suggests to you that you should be thinking of working at a bigger scale. You know, you're not going to make a real small plant out of a plant that has leaves this big. You can if you want. You can do it successfully, but it won't look right. Right? So when you work with a larger leaf plant, you're generally going to work in a larger format and go for a larger finished product. That would be the main thing, I think, in terms of what it would influence me, how it would influence me. All right, I'm looking now, and because I can see in a little bit better, I'm starting to pay more attention to the trunks. Because really, today, that's where the action is going to be. I've already told you most of the foliage is going to be cut away. And so the main thing that we're looking at in terms of design on this plant is the arrangement of the trunks. And we'll have some branches, but they're going to have to be shortened so much that most of the foliage will be gone. The big challenge is going to be getting this, you know, which is really badly overgrown, into this. Right? It can be done, and again, I would never ideally do that. because this should have been repotted. You know, even as a nursery plant, this should have been repotted, meaning bumped into a bigger container or put into the ground a year ago. So it's overgrown down here. And that could be a big reason why it's got the problems with the aphids, because that does put a plant under a lot of stress. Does not have enough room for its roots to grow. So please make mention of that to Blaine as well. Say, geez, for crying out loud, did you lift the plant out of the pot to see how badly it was root bound?
Talk a little slower, I can't write that fast, Arthur.
Some of these branches are so long that they fall over. They can't hold up their own weight. I don't know if they're ultimately going to be cut off or not, but I'm going to go ahead and trim them back just to kind of see if they pop up at all. A lot of weight in the flower buds. Yeah, I'm looking and I'm seeing, you know, pretty good size trunk here, another one right here, and then we've got this deal going off in this direction that splits. It forks just about an inch above where it comes off of the main trunk. One thing I feel pretty confident about now, the more I look at it, see this one here that I'm moving, and there's this one next to it. And it seems very unlikely that both of those would stay. I don't know how well you can see that, but they're like literally right next to each other. It could be that we could reposition this smaller one. It's still kind of movable. But if I'm going to have a multiple trunk tree, which is what this kind of has to be. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I could pick one trunk and cut the other two off entirely. But why do that? You know, if the plant is offering you this option of having a multiple trunk tree, why not, you know, consider that as being a likely way to go? If you don't like it a year from now, you can always cut off the other couple of trunks or one trunk or whatever suits you. But today, looking at it, I think, well, we'll go with a multiple trunk. When you have a multiple trunk tree, if one of them is going to be centrally located, which is what would happen if I move this one kind of out of the way, it would put it right in the center of the composition. And if something is going to be centrally located, it ought to be the dominant trunk. When we grow multiple trunk trees, we generally don't want them to all be of equal value. We want one that's dominant and the others are subordinate. This creates interest. When you have three things that are exactly the same, it's less interesting than if you have three things that are of differing values. Smaller, taller, shorter. It creates visual interest. That's what this is mostly about. When we shape our trees, tomorrow, all those plants, what we're going to be looking at is how do you take something that has a natural form, just the way that the plant wanted to grow, more or less, and give it an artistic kind of presentation, a design. And there are some principles that apply to almost all of the plant material that you use. And one of them is that there has to be a focal point. When you look at a bonsai, you want there to be something that you see first. And I'm saying you see first, and it would be better to say that the viewer sees first, right? So when the person comes along and you have your plant out at the show, they stand in front of it, and you want to be reasonably certain that when they look at your plant, the thing that you want them to see first is what they see first. And generally speaking in bonsai, if it's a single trunk tree, the thing that you want them to see first is the trunk. Then the branches, the foliage, the container, but the trunk is the focal point. When you have more than one trunk, one needs to be dominant so that your plant still has a focal point. One stands out from the others, and so it draws attention to itself. When you have a forest or a group planting and you have numerous trees in it, maybe you have 7 trees, maybe you have 10 trees, maybe you have 30 trees, it doesn't matter. One of them is dominant. One of them is the focal point, the thing that all the rest of the composition is organized around. The thing that when the viewer stands in front of your piece, they see it first. Your design, and this doesn't matter if you're talking about bonsai or a painting, statuary, any kind of visual art, your design is a premeditated experience for the viewer. You are organizing the parts of whatever material you're working with so that the viewer who stands in front of it has an experience, an organized experience. And if you do it well, it's a satisfying experience. The person looks at it and says, oh, isn't that lovely? You know, it's such a nice looking plant. When you don't do it well, when it doesn't work right, then you see people look at it and, you know, they're kind of craning their neck and they go look around the side and they're putting their hand up like, yeah, I would take that branch off. And that means that the experience isn't working for them. They're looking at it critically and saying, I would do this, I would do that. Bonsai people are big critics, generally speaking. So you want to try to outsmart them and make such a nice arrangement out of the pieces of your plant that when they look at it, they say, oh, that's perfect. Ha, good luck with that. The short of it is that this is going to get cut off because it's in a position where if I move it away from this trunk, it stands right in the middle. And I really want the attention to land on this trunk because I think this is the strongest of the three trunks. So we go ahead and we'll take this out. We're generally going to do cuts in 2 passes, right? The first pass is just to remove the bulk of the material, right? Get the mass of it out of the way. Then later on we can come back and do a better cut, a closer cut. For right now I'm just going to leave the stop there because it doesn't matter. Later on we do the finish work and make it look neat. Okay, so now I'm thinking as I look at this that, well, if this is going to be my central trunk, one thing I might want to do is see when I repot it if I can stand it up some and make that central trunk stand straight. That's one option. We can't know yet until we see what the base of this plant looks like. What I'm seeing now, what you're seeing now, is not really the base of the plant. It's just the base of the plant as it exists currently. But we're going to dig down there, and I'm assuming, if we're lucky, we'll find some flare. We'll find some larger roots that we can show off, and that'll make the plant look more substantial. It'll make it look older, but it'll also make it look like it's really firmly planted in the ground instead of just kind of poking up out of the ground, which is what it's doing now. So that might be one thing that we do, is try to reposition it so that that's standing up straight. And another possibility is that we alter other parts so that the whole plant has this feeling of moving that way, moving the way that this tree, this trunk is inclined. We'll see. All right, now, I've already said I think this is my main tree, so this would be the secondary one, and then this one back here would be the least of the 3. Just shortening, because I know it's going to have to be shortened. Some of this stuff is really very leggy, you know, and we can't go that far without branching. So we cut it, and one of the things that makes Camellia good to work with is it has the ability to grow new growth off of old wood. Right? There are some plants, if this was a juniper, and I cut off all the green part, then this woody part that remains would just die. But not so with the Camellia. It'll push out new growth from there. Very handy thing when you're dealing with something that's as, you know, overgrown and leggy as this is. You're recording this for Blaine will see it, right? Overgrown and leggy and root bound. I hope you're enjoying your cruise.
Don't forget the aphids.
Yeah, and the aphids too, yes. Great. The only demonstrations I have to go home and shower after. I don't begrudge Blaine his holiday. No, I don't. I don't. You know, this group, all of us who are here tonight, it's because of Blaine Dougherty. He's the one who started this club. He's the one who nurtured it along. He's the one who stepped up each time that there was a void that needed filling. So he's put a lot into this, even if he's not here right now. Clubs are a hard thing to pull off in this day and age. I don't know how much longer the idea of a club will go on. I don't mean just a bonsai club, but any kind of social organization like this. It's a great thing. Benjamin Franklin said that social organizations like this were the foundation of democracy. But of course that was 200-something years ago. And things have changed. And now I think a lot of people would rather be at home on the internet than, come out on a night like tonight and sit in a room and have to deal with live people. And yet there's something very useful in doing this kind of thing. Blaine, of course, used to be a member of the Hinoki Bonsai Society in Virginia, which has been around for a good while. And when he retired here and found that there wasn't a bonsai organization, he went ahead and started one. And because I knew him from his days in Virginia, he invited me to come out and do the first program that I did for the club, which would have been, I don't know how long ago that was now.
At least 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at least 10 years. Yeah.
About 2000.
And of course, he also got this club involved in the show that we do every year, the Carolina Bonsai Expo. And last year, I got a call from him maybe 6 weeks before the expo saying, I don't think we're going to pull it together this year. We might have to sit this one out. Well, I can understand this kind of thing, but I can't allow it. Just as it's hard to run a social organization like this, none of you gets paid to be here. And the club officers, who put in extra time and all that, they don't get paid to do this, right? It's all voluntary. And just like this only works because people chip in, Mary, the other officers, give their time, you folks make time to come to the meetings and so forth. All this is what makes it happen. Well, the expo is the same way. Nobody gets, I get paid my usual salary to work that weekend, right? But other than that, the only person who makes a profit on the expo is the guest artist, right? Because the way I structure the expo, it's not a money-making deal. It's a self-paying deal. So your organization, the clubs from all the other places that participate, from Atlanta to Knoxville to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to Virginia Bonsai Society in Norfolk, these people, just like you, travel great distances and put up at the hotels and spend all that money and all the rest of it. And it's all voluntary, And the only thing that keeps it going is your willingness to keep participating. So when Blaine calls me 6 weeks before the show and says, well, looks like we're going to take a year off, I pat myself on the back for not, cursing at him. Because as hard as it is to put things together, it's that easy for them to unravel. And something that's taken years and years and years to put together can unravel in a matter of months, you know, or weeks. So, I don't know how it was that your club pulled it together and put on a very nice display at the expo last year. I don't think Blaine had anything to do with it, because he wasn't there. All right, so it was Mary and the other officers. I appreciate your doing that. That meant a great deal to me. And your display looked great. It really did. You know, when Blaine called me back kind of sheepishly, a few days or a week later, whatever it was, and said, "Well, it looks like we'll have something." I thought, well, that's good. They're going to be in, but then I thought, like, oh, something. That doesn't sound too encouraging. But when I looked at the club display, I thought, well, that's great. You know, so congratulations not only for turning out, but for turning out well.
He had the number 3 in the People's Choice Award.
Good.
Number 3, the Bougainvillea was his.
To be fair to Blaine, you know, it shouldn't be all on him. And it shouldn't be all on Mary. It's a group. It should be on everyone, because that makes it bearable. When one person carries too much of the load for too long, they need to go on cruises.
Author in defense of, I guess, the majority of us, I think we just didn't feel like our trees were qualifying trees. Maybe that was wrong, but I think that was a lot of the reason.
And I can appreciate that. But I can tell you, too, that the majority of clubs feel the same way. There's a handful of them that go into this, you know, confident, you know, hey, we're going to win this year, and so forth.
And they used to do.
And they
But
live in Columbia, South Carolina.
hey, now let me tell you, those guys, they took the easy way out. They used to have a club in Columbia. And it was the Bonsai Club Bonsai Club of South Carolina. And I would go every year and do programs for them too. And sometimes, some years it was like this. I would come there, there'd be, 20 people, 25 people in the room, right? And then things started thinning out. And so the last couple of times I went, there was only like a dozen people in the room, right? And then one day I got a call, and Ken and John, who run that club, said, well, we shut the club down. It's too much trouble. We couldn't get anybody to help, As long as we did everything, people would come out. But when we tried to get other people to do stuff, they were too busy, they didn't feel like it, they didn't think they were qualified, blah, blah, blah. And so they finally said, hey, we don't need this. We can do bonsai among ourselves. We'll call it a study group. And that's who displays. That's so much easier. It's just Ken, John Quinn, and Mike Boynton. There's 4 of them. Makes it so much easier, right? In terms of deciding whose trees get shown and so forth. Simple as pie. Don't do that. It's a shame, because what happens now when, they're all getting older, things happen, you don't know. They drop out of the picture, then there is no bonsai in Columbia, South Carolina. The people who might learn, who might be interested, they don't have a club to go to. That makes the chances of them getting involved and learning and making it into a rewarding pastime, that diminishes the chance of that happening. Not to, put a guilt trip on them. I understand their reasoning too. But their decision made life easier for them, but it also denied other people the chance to find out what this is about. Back to the tree. I've been working to kind of organize branching, thinking about, which of these things are positioned in a way that I can use them. And I'm looking at this deal right here. These two are kind of close together in terms of where they originate from the trunk. And then they go in kind of opposite directions. So I'm looking at them now and wondering, do I need both of them? There's nothing that says you can't keep both of them. But if I keep both of them, I don't want them going in opposite directions. Why? Because it's a distraction. back to that idea of creating an experience for the viewer, organizing the plant so that it makes sense when the viewer looks at it. Things like this create distraction. When you have two branches coming out of like the same place on the tree, and one goes this way and one goes that way, the viewer doesn't know which way they're supposed to look. It becomes confusing. Do trees in nature have such things? Yes, commonly. Trees in nature have all kinds of things that we wouldn't necessarily want to emulate in our bonsai design. It's up to the individual. Somebody else might look at this and say, you know, I don't find that a distraction. I think that looks pretty good, actually. And they would keep it. But for me, that's a distraction. This is the one I'm going to remove because it's heading off that way. How bendable is it? Well, since I'm going to cut it off anyway, let's find out. Very bendable. That's good. That's good to know, you know, because maybe somewhere else on this plant I'll want to put a severe bend on it, and now I know it has a good degree of flexibility to it. I'm sorry, if you were doing that to please me, it didn't help. That one's gone. Okay. This is how I'm thinking of displaying the plant. In other words, this is what I think will be the front. Anytime we do a bonsai, we think in terms of having a formal viewing front, a way that the plant is meant to be seen. It will be seen from all directions, and you have to pay attention to how it appears from all directions. But when it comes to formally displaying it at a show like the expo, this is how I'm going to set the plant in front of people. And that's a useful thing for me as the designer because I'm thinking in terms of the experience that the viewer is going to have, and to give me greater control, it helps for me to know which way the viewer is going to be seeing the plant. And it allows me to pick out the best features of the plant and prominently display them. And if the plant has something that we might think of as a fault or a flaw, it allows me the opportunity to disguise that, to put those things maybe in a position where they're not as clearly seen. I have a similar deal going on here with these two. I haven't made a decision about it yet, but this is something that catches my eye. When I look at the plant, I see this and I think, well, if they're both going to stay, we're going to have to get closer together. I'm still not certain about this deal here, you know? I like this one better. I'm looking for something to fill the space right here. And this does it in a somewhat clunky way. Well, let's see. We shorten it. Make it a little less clunky like that. That might be usable. I don't know. If you're not sure, sit on it a while. Wait. You know? You can't wait forever, not in a demonstration at least. But if you're uncertain, you don't have to make a decision that moment. You can wait. In the meantime, I'll go back to shortening things, taking little nips here and there, opening up the view so that I can better understand the plant, better see the way that it's laid out. One fault or problem that's going to have to be overcome is a big void right here. And that was because of the way that these grew right next to each other like that. When you have two parts growing like that and you remove one, there's going to be a big emptiness. No branches came out of this side of the tree because this was crowding it. Up here I've got a whole kind of mess of branching. 3 prominent things all kind of occupying the same area. And I think in the end we're only going to keep one. This one isn't badly situated, but it's badly formed. Its structure is not so usable. Process of elimination tells me, all right, take that one away. Now my decision becomes a little bit easier because there are only two things I have to choose between. One of them goes straight out. Okay? This one right here, I don't know if you can see it. This one goes straight out from the trunk. This one, I just broke. Process of elimination. Sometimes you make decisions knowingly and sometimes you don't. Okay, too bad because I was going to keep that one. How much of it is arbitrary? I don't know. If I was really cocksure, I'd say none of it's arbitrary. It's all completely thought out. But I don't think that's true. Every time you make a snip, you change things a little bit. You change things from how they are to how they will be. And invariably, what you lose is what they might have been. We can't help this. It's part of the game. We remove. You try to make your best choice. Try not to make mistakes. But this isn't any different than the rest of life. You know, you try not to make mistakes, but they happen anyway. You just don't admit them. Especially if you're an expert from out of town. This is the top of my tree right there. Okay? If I know this is the top of my tree, then all the rest of this has to be less than this. Because if this is the top, these parts can't be taller than it. Looking here, looking at branch structure, and again, the branches do all kinds of things, just like they do in nature. Branches do all kinds of things. They grow not at all the way that the books tell you that your bonsai is supposed to look. But stuff happens along the way. I think I saw that on a bumper sticker once. Stuff happens. Just clean this out, right, to show the structure of this particular branch. All right. So say this is still attached to the tree like this. All right. Now in nature you might well see something like this because this is the way plants grow. But in nature too, maybe there was a terrible storm one night and, you know, it broke this branch off. And maybe there was another branch like positioned right here and this one was really disadvantaged, and after a while it kind of withers and then fails, right? We do with this what nature does with other means, right? Insects, lightning strikes, competition, what have you. Trees are shaped by the forces of nature. This is what makes the old trees interesting. When we see an old tree up on the mountaintop or down at the shore, when you go to Fort Fisher and you see those live oaks that have been blown by the wind for who knows how long, it gives them character because of everything that they've been through. This is what makes them worth emulating. This is why when we grow bonsai, we don't emulate young trees, because they don't really have much character. They have appeal. You know, it's nice to see a young maple tree this time of year with its blush of red flowers, you know, it's very appealing. But you're not going to look nearly as long at that tree as you're going to look at that craggy tree that's been sitting out in the farmer's field for 100 years and has a big hole in it that the raccoons live in, and, you know, half the tree got torn off in that terrible storm in '89, that kind of thing. And so with this tool, we try to build in that interest, which this plant really doesn't have. And so we make these choices about how should I shape this branch. I think you can see that pretty plainly, right? I don't want to keep all of what's there, but what should I take off? Should I take off this lower one and go with this piece here, which is stronger? Should I take off this one and give this one an interesting bend? Well, you know, the choice I make right now might not be the choice I would have made last week. It might not be the choice that you would make. And that's why every time we make a snip, we change this for better or worse. I'm going to go with the lower one, because I like that little bit of movement that it gives it, that bend. It gives it a little bit more visual interest. It's still too long, so I'm going to shorten it. How much? Well, the conservative thing to do would be to shorten it that much, because there's a leaf there, and that's kind of like an insurance policy. As long as that leaf's there, I have a better chance of this remaining alive. The trouble is, this is one of those nasty, kind of unhealthy looking leaves, so it really isn't offering much help at all. So I'm going to cut it shorter. And I think this will live and sprout new growth, but I'm not sure it will. I can't be certain, but this will definitely live. So even if this fails, I've got a branch here. I might have to reposition it with wire or whatever, but I can be reasonably certain that this is going to live. This will probably live, but this will definitely live. Now I'm looking back down here at the arrangement between these two. I like the size of this. It's got some girth to it, and in lower branches we really like to see that. Remember, the branches that are down low on a tree are generally the ones that were there the longest, because of the way trees grow. They're growing from the top. They're not emerging out of the ground, you know. So the lowest branches are the ones that were there originally. And so that means they're typically going to be the bigger branches. Also, from an aesthetic standpoint, things feel more balanced when the greater weight is down low. When you have greater weight up high, it tends to make things look top-heavy. And so, for those reasons, I would like to use this branch, if I can. Shape it up a little bit. Take that off. Take that. That. And sharp. Look at these leaves. Look at. Lane. Look. Could you not pick up the leaf and look? All right. Yeah, see, I don't want to keep them both because they're kind of doing the same thing. It's like two salesmen working the same end of the block. We don't need them both. This one has better position. I like where it is better, but this one has better size. In the end, I'm going to go with the position, because you can make a branch bigger. We can build this branch up and make it stronger. We can't pick this branch off of where it is and put it somewhere else. So go ahead and pick that off. Now, this one, I'm going to make this snip right here because we have a three-way split. And generally, you know, when you have an intersection, oh, come on now, there's got to be one here. When you have an intersection that has more than 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, 5 parts, this is common like when you work with azaleas, right? Every node, it's got like 5 or 6 different parts. You generally want to keep just 2. I can't say exactly why that is, except that it works. I would like to shorten this. It doesn't need to be any bigger than this. It could actually be a little bit shorter. But I want it to get thicker, which means I have to let it grow and then shorten. And in the process of letting it grow, this will fatten up. When we keep pruning and pruning and pruning, it slows down the rate of growth. Unfortunately, all these leaves have that aphid on them. Whoever takes this plant home, what they'll need to do is wash all this off. There aren't going to be many leaves left, so it won't be a big job. You take some warm water, just put a little bit of dish detergent in it, and wash them off, and then rinse it all off. Right? The dish detergent will kill any residue. But that needs to happen, otherwise they'll just repopulate the plant. You see this little flower bud here, not to be mean, but it takes a lot of energy for the plant to produce a flower and then seed if it's allowed to go to seed. There's no reason for this plant to put out flowers. Yes?
Generally speaking, will the leaves, new leaves that grow out be smaller
No.
on those or no?
Over time, yes, but initially, no. Some of the new leaves that grow back from here might be over large, but it's okay. Remember, this is just taking a step. This tree isn't going to be ready for the show in October. It's not going to be ready for the show next October, and probably not the October after that. This is in the very earliest stages, and so short term, it doesn't matter if it has big leaves. Let it keep the big leaves for the sake of the strength of the plant. We're taking so much away from this plant, so much. You know, a great many bonsai demo trees die within a month, 6 weeks of having undergone this shock therapy. That's the big dirty secret in bonsai, right? People spend all this money to bring in a big honcho. He comes in, he chops up a plant, somebody takes it home, they're all proud and happy. A month later, the plant is dead, and they think they did it. It's like, oh my God, I killed this plant. I can't ever go to another bonsai tree. And most of the time, no. The death happened the night of the demo. Too much done at once.
Arthur, you're not selling any wrap.
Now this one will live.
I'd like to
Can you spray that with a killer or some sort of chemical? Those
Yes.
acids?
Yes.
What would you use?
What I would use would be either insecticidal soap or horticultural oil. And these are both fairly benign pesticides.
Could you wipe it off with some alcohol?
Yes. Yes. But you know, the dish detergent, mild dish detergent will work too, and then you just rinse it off.
Arthur,
Yes, please.
if you have a concern that we're going to be doing too much because of the overgrown condition of the root ball,
Yes.
you can reduce the pot that you took it out of by half.
Yes.
Reduce this ball by half, put it back in, send whoever wins the tree home with the pot and the.
That would be great. I don't want you to feel cheated. Like, oh, we wanted to see it stuffed into the little fancy pot.
That might be better in this instance. We had very unusual weather this year.
Yes.
And I think we might see a heck of a summer. It might be a better option if we did that.
It would absolutely be a better option as long as you'll be satisfied with that.
Okay, everybody okay with that?
And then maybe you can send the pot with the plant still, right? So eventually it'll get into the pot.
Let the patient live.
That's right. I'm glad to hear that you feel that way. Because really, look now. It can be done. It can be done. And the plant might even live through it. But why? You know, why subject it to that? Doesn't make sense. Okay. So that's what we'll do. We will repot it because it's a good idea. See what will happen if you do all this pruning of the top and no pruning of the roots, when it regrows, you know, it's an explosion because there's all stored energy in here. And the plant will grow these tremendous long shoots with big leaves on them. Not good. Then you have to cut them, right? So we want to take some away from here just to try to keep some sense of balance between what's above the ground and what's below the ground. All right, so this is my main tree now, kind of pretty well all worked out, as much as it's going to be tonight. Now I'm going to move over to the secondary tree. It doesn't look like a secondary tree anymore because it's got so much and this has been stripped down. So obviously the object here will be to strip this down to the point where it's subordinate to this one. All right. There's not a lot of flexibility in this. I mean, there is some, but I think in the end, we might pull them together a little bit, but we're not going to get a whole lot out of them. We might be able to bring them an inch or two closer to each other, which would be useful just because of this big void here. But there's not a lot of flexibility in this. So it needs to be shortened, and it needs to be shortened at least that much. Okay? I'm looking at that and I'm seeing that I've got this and I've got this that can be cut back to, and this will take over as the new top of this tree. Same way that this takes over as the new top of this part of the tree. Well, oh goodness. I'm gonna pass this around so that everybody can see it and recognize it, because you don't want to buy plants that have that much.
Well, they are very common here. They are all over the place.
Yes. Yes. You know, things eat plants. That's a fact, and it's a problem for plant growers. But when you buy a plant from the nursery, it should be clean and healthy. Should be. Not just bonsai plants. Any plant material you buy, the nursery, as a point of professional pride, should be selling you a clean, healthy plant. Of course, it depends where you do your shopping. And maybe a healthy plant is not your ultimate objective. Maybe there's some other criteria that's more important.
Knowing Blaine, it was probably cost.
Cost! There's a consideration. Sometimes when you take these big overgrown plants that they haven't been able to sell for years, they'll give you a good deal on them.
Can you use systemics in the soil to get the bugs?
Yes. Systemics, for people who don't know, those are pesticides that you apply usually in a drench, right? The chemical is dissolved in water, or it might be granular and goes on the surface, but the idea is that it goes down into the soil and the plant takes it up through the roots and then distributes the chemical through all its parts. It's very effective. However, it makes your plant poisonous. And it's in all parts. Right? So you're working on the plant. If you're not wearing gloves, that chemical is in contact with your skin. I'm a licensed pesticide applicator for the state of North Carolina. Right? I get tested every so often. It's serious stuff. When I go down the aisle at Lowe's or Home Depot, and I see the kind of stuff that anybody can walk off the street and buy, it gives me the willies. And people do all kinds of terrible things with that because they don't recognize it for being what it is. Yes?
One of the standard recommendations that I've heard for treating pests on your plants is to use a rotation, use 2 or 3 different grams so that whatever insect is spraying on your trees doesn't become tolerant of what you're spraying. Does the same thing apply for systemics?
Yes. And it's not brands. It's the method by which the chemical kills the insect. Because they act differently. Different chemicals kill through different means. Some chemicals will interfere with the insect's growth cycle so that they don't mature and don't become reproductive. Others attack the plant's or the insect's nervous system. And these are generally the most dangerous chemicals because they can have an effect on the human nervous system as well. And so, yes, you're supposed to rotate the type of chemical you use so that the insects don't build up a tolerance. You know, when you use horticultural oil, that smothers them. There is no building up a tolerance to being smothered. That kills mechanically, and that is something the insects can't overcome.
Do you have good luck with neem oil in your collection?
I use neem oil, and at the very least, it works the way that other oils do, other horticultural oils. It smothers the insects. Whether you believe the other claims that are made for it as being a growth regulator, I don't know. But I like it because I don't have to suit up when I apply it.
I feel safe using it. Right?
Yes.
But my spider mites and aphids kind of laugh at me. Keep right on going.
They should. When you have a plant that has a problem, like this plant does, the first thing you do is take a hose When it's a full plant, not, you know, when we cut it down like this, it becomes very easy to go leaf to leaf and clean it mechanically. But when it's a full plant, right, and you're not wanting to take all this away, you take a garden hose and blast it with water. And through the physical action of the force of the water, you'll clean most of the pests off. That doesn't work on scale because scale applies itself and sticks to the plant. But aphids, spider mites, you can remove the great majority of them just through the force of the water. And then you apply your chemical, and then it's going to be more effective. Okay, I'm going to sit on this decision for a little while. I don't know if I'm going to keep all this, you know, both parts of this plus this, or if something's going to get removed. So I'm going to turn my attention to another area, and that's this back here. I like the relationship between these two. I think it's pretty good. It does need to be shortened. And this, you know, really, it should be shortened more, but I'm going to play it safe and leave a few leaves. I would really like it to be more like this height. But for right now, or until I change my mind in a few minutes, we'll leave it at this height as it is. But it needs to be shorter than that. Okay, but this deal back here, I want something back here. I don't want all of this. So, go ahead and shorten this because it's kind of hanging in the way there. Okay. Now I need to have a little bit more definite idea about how I'm going to display this plant, what's going to be front, and it would help to mark that. So I think like that. That's how I'm going to look at it. Which means where this originates is kind of blocked by this. But then we see it, right? We see it. We don't see where it originates, but we see its effect. That's good. Still, there's too much back there. I like this part better because it's got movement. You know, it comes out here and it makes a turn. This is just this big straight shot. But this is in the better position. So once again, I'm inclined to go with the part that's got the better position. I don't keep both of them because to me it looks too clunky. They're both about equal size and it just makes a big Y and they go in opposite directions. So I'm not inclined to keep both of them. I wish this little part here was coming out of the other side. That would be really handy, but it's not. I could try to reposition this, but then that takes what's most agreeable about it and starts to make it look awkward. So, having thought through all that, this comes off. You might think I talk because I like the sound of my voice, but I talk to try to verbalize my thought process when working on a tree. The things that I'm saying to you are things I would be thinking if you weren't here and I was working on this tree. Only much wittier. But this is, you know, there's a process at work here. And, you know, my job is to try to make it plain what my process is. Not that, oh, well, you should do it exactly the way I do it. That's not the idea. But rather to put it out there so that you can evaluate. And then you'll have somebody else come through another time and they'll give you their idea. And it may be something completely different. And you weigh it out. My first teacher, my first significant teacher, and really the most significant teacher I ever had was Mr. Yoshimura, Yuji Yoshimura. And one of the things that he impressed upon me was he said, you listen to everyone. You get a broad field of ideas, and then you weigh them out and you choose. He said, maybe you listen to 50% of what you hear. You know, listen to it, but you act on 50% of it. And then he said, even with me, even the things I say to you, weigh them out and choose for yourself. And that would be what I would say to all of you too, you know? It's not like this is all figured out. It's not. There's room for new ideas. There's room for individuality. And anyone who tells you it has to be done a certain way is giving you bad information. The only way it has to be done is to your satisfaction. If it's your tree, at the end, you have to look at it and say, I like that. And if you accomplish that, then you've done well. And then it doesn't matter if somebody else comes along and says, your tree stinks. You know, the branches are all wrong. This should be the front, blah, 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 blah. That won't matter. If you like what you've done, then you've accomplished the goal. We were speaking a little bit earlier. I'm going to take this off. I hate to do it, but really what I need is something going this way, right? I want it to go this way and kind of echo this trunk, but I don't have anything there. So we'll just have to wait for sprouts, and they'll come. We were talking a little bit earlier about the expo, and I know that 2 years ago, not this most recent year when we had Walter Paul, but the year before, we had a guest artist who's very knowledgeable and very good bonsai guy, very critical, and very traditional in his thinking. Not his own tradition, but somebody else's tradition, you know, Japanese tradition. And he has a very set idea about how things are supposed to be done. And I knew that before I invited him to come. But I respected his knowledge. And just like I told you a moment ago, when I hear him talk, I'm processing what he says. And I'm pulling stuff out. I'm saying, oh, this is useful. I'm going to put this over here. This part, I don't agree with, so I'm going to put it over here, and I'm not going to pay attention to it. And I know that he had unkind things to say about a lot of the displays at the expo. And I know that he didn't mean to be hurtful in the things that he said. He was just being honest. So if he thought something looked bad, he would come right out and say, oh, this is terrible. You never do this. Right? Very, very absolutist in his thinking. And I know that he hurt people's feelings. He hurt people in this club, and he hurt people in other clubs. And I feel bad about that, but it's one of those things like, you know, that's how it is. When you put something personal, like a creative effort, out in the public venue, you're going to take some shots. Long before I got involved with bonsai, I used to do painting. And I did art shows, you know, different kinds of shows. Sometimes it was a very nice formal kind of thing where they were hanging on walls in a museum, you know, setting or a gallery setting. And sometimes it was, you know, set up on the lawn of some public facility, you know, where it was like art weekend or something. And people would come along who couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. And they would look at my stuff and say, wow, that's not very good. You know, and you want to, but you can't. And you can't give them more credit than they deserve. Now this fella who was at the expo, he knows what he's talking about. But in a field that's this wide, he keeps his view this wide on purpose, because that's what he likes. And our job, when he says something that's critical and uncomplimentary, our job is to say, now, let's see, how much of that is really correct, and how much of that is just because his view is this wide, and what I did doesn't fall within that range. So, if anybody in this room was one of the people who felt badly about something he said, he's gone back to Canada.
We just have to get over it.
Well, I stopped, as soon as he said in his hometown, all the women were in one club and all the men were in the other, I stopped listening.
He pulled me aside at one point when there wasn't anyone around. The show was, you know, the building was closed and we were walking through together. He said, now look at this, look. And somebody in the display that he chose as the best in show display, not individual piece, but the whole display. Somebody had a cascade plant, and they had it displayed on a stand that allowed for the cascade to flow over and not touch the ground, right? Which seems pretty correct. You want to put that plant up high so that it has room, okay? And it was a nice stand. I mean, it wasn't like a cheapo job. It was a nice, carved, finished, professionally made stand. And he said, "That's terrible. Do you know what that stand is for?" And I looked at him and said, "No, I have no idea." He said, "That is for," and he told me, and it's a Chinese thing, and it's meant to display a certain object. I think it's a lamp. Some kind of lamp is supposed to go on this stand. You would never use that stand for a bonsai. And I said, "I would." You know, if I had that stand, I had a cascade plant, I would put on. And he looked at me like, are you kidding? Are you that gauche? You know, that you would use that for a bonsai? And I said, "Well, look, it's a nice looking piece. It coordinates with the plant, but it's not made for that." Okay. Okay. You know, I'm not going to try to change his mind. But I weigh that out and I say, I don't care what it's made for. Does it look good? Does it work? Great. Great. You guys, in your display that year, you used shot glasses underneath boards, right, to make tables. And I looked at that and I thought, hey, that's a neat idea. Not that, in all honesty, I wouldn't be inclined to do that. But I looked at it and I admired it as being like, hey, that's pretty creative, right? And then you also used, if I remember right, a kind of floral print fabric. And I looked at that and I thought, yeah, that's kind of neat too. Not my taste, not what I would do, but hey, looked good to me. What do I know? I'm looking at this now, right? I've got this figured out to a certain degree, and I'm looking at this. And now I'm feeling like, well, you know what? I don't mind it being there. I wouldn't mind having a branch there. But to me, for this branch to be this weak and this to be so strong is a real distraction. Even though I know that if I were growing this plant after today, I would be trying to grow this out to fatten it up to the point where it would be at least as big as this. And holding this one back so that it didn't get much bigger. But I'm going to take it off today because I'm not the one who's going to be growing this after today. So I'm going to set it up so that the person who does grow it is starting with something that's kind of got all things in place at reasonable value, right? So that you don't have to go to extraordinary measures to get where you want to be. So that if the person who grows this doesn't choose to grow it out, when I say grow it out, if I took this home and grew it, next year when you saw it, this branch might stick out this far. Because I wouldn't take anything away from it. I would let it grow just to fatten this up and then chase it back. Maybe the person who takes this home doesn't do that. Maybe they just start pruning on it the way it is. Well, this will work with this. If you grow these the same way, it'll work. So that's my thinking there, and that's why I'm leaving it done that way. Now I'm going back and cleaning up the spots where I left stobs. And I'm looking at this terribly overgrown root ball and thinking, oh goodness. I'm sure glad that Mary's going to allow me to just cut it in half, but even that sounds like a lot of work. Wish I had a Sawzall, which really is a good tool for something like this. A reciprocating saw. You take it and then you pick apart and cut with scissors to make a clean cut, and you make the job so much easier. But we're not going to be doing that.
You can bring that next year.
I got to buy one first. I want to have one. It would be a useful tool for me, but I don't have it yet. So.
Years down the road, when this tree gets smaller leaves, will the flowers also?
No.
Get smaller? They always be the same size.
Yes.
Big.
Yes. But when it comes to flowers, nobody cares if they're oversized. You know, people who make a big fuss about leaves being too big, oh, when they see those big lovely flowers, no problem. Because people get silly about flowers. And remember, I mean, these flower longer than most things, but how many weeks out of the year will this be in flower?
Maybe 4 to 6.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is not a long time. When you talk about something like an azalea, what, 2 weeks max? 52 weeks in a year, 2 weeks it's going to have flowers? Makes them special, I guess.
Have a whole festival named after them.
Yeah. Well, there's all kinds of festivals.
Yeah,
There's a Camellia festival too, right?
I guess.
This weekend.
When I was in Japan, they had a peony festival. And you should have seen the way they had the displays. It was outdoors. It was in Ueno Park, which is this big park. It's like Central Park in Tokyo. And they had these displays set up, and each peony was represented by one flower. And it was in a decorative vase, and it had a little shed built over it to protect it from the elements, because it was February. It was pretty neat. Not anything I'd want to do, but it was neat to look at. Okay, so now we got to work this down and see what the base looks like. I've got a root hook here. I'll start with that. It's going to make a big mess up here.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, you sure about that? I can try to contain it, but you know.
You want a big garbage can?
Yeah, if you have a can, I'll work. I can work over this one. We'll try to contain it, but it is going to make a mess.
They clean it up and get the wall
There's
out.
some extra plastic in that.
Turning the hook sideways, instead of using it like this, using it like this, you can pull away soil from the base without damaging the wood. You know, either the wood at the base of the tree or the roots that show. Thank you very much. And my appreciation to the person who didn't water this, because this job is so much easier when the plant is dry than if the root ball is sopping wet. Down here below the surface, a tag. Camellia japonica. Mississippi, Biloxi. So it says.
Is that the variety or where it's from?
I don't know.
That's where it was in quarantine.
Yeah, so these are Mississippi vermin. And look, here's a snail shell. Great. Maybe we'll find a rat nest down in here.
Not the boll weevil just looking for home.
Down Mississippi, pygmy rattlers like they're up in be careful.
Now you jelly. Yeah.
This is coming apart pretty easily. Not bad. You see, we've already gone down like an inch here, and we're going to go more than that. Sometimes, I'm sorry?
In the future, how small will the leaves get?
You know, you may be able to work it down to where you're getting leaves this size or this size instead of this size. So that's pretty good reduction. But I mean, in terms of small leaves, they'll never be really, really small. You know, you can use something like Hokkaido elm, and they have leaves that are 1/8 of an inch. But I don't know. Big leaf plants are okay. You just have to work them a little differently. This is, you know, this is the part when you use material from a nursery, just a regular landscape nursery.
I'm taking a picture of the roots, but you know.
Where you can get surprises. And you know, some surprises can be good and some surprises can be bad. But we don't know until we dig down here what this root base looks like. And now it's starting to emerge, and we got a big hump over on this side.
Is that good or bad?
I don't know yet. It could be bad. It could be really ugly. Or it might be the kind of thing that you look at and say, yeah, this got interest, you know? People have different ideas about this. If you take a very strict kind of Japanese view of things, then you want a base that has, you know, uniformity in its spread and roots that radiate in all directions like the wheels of a spoke or a spoke of a wheel. But it doesn't have to be so. You know, you can find plants that have interesting and unusual bases that are outside of those kind of perfect dimensions that are really very good. But unfortunately, you can find some too that are just ugly, you know, all on one side, badly crossing roots. When you go to a bonsai nursery, assuming it's a good nursery, you're paying for somebody to have done this work years ago. Developing the plant, not just the part above the ground, but the part below the ground too, the part you can't see. That all along, like I've done with those plants there, not just the top, but the bottom has been worked too. So if I took that big one out of the box, even though it appears to have these big solid roots going down into the soil, there isn't a big root in there. It's all fine fibrous roots. That has an excellent root system that if I wanted to, I could take that plant and put it in this pot, and it would definitely live. It would have a greater likelihood of living than this plant would, because the roots have been trained all along the way. Good bonsai nurseries do that. They train the plant so that when you buy it, it's ready to be designed. It's got branching you can choose from, but not branching that you're going to have to take off, you know, pieces this big. It's got branching, but the branching that's there has been kept compact and has ramification. And you're making a choice. Do I want this branch or this branch? And then you cut one off, and the one that remains is a lot better structured than this one. But that's what you pay for, you know? And where this plant costs $5.99 or whatever Blaine paid for it, to buy a plant that's been pre-trained for bonsai for 10 years, that's going to cost a lot of money. But if you look in the mirror and you say, you know what, I don't have 20 years to wait for my bonsai to really start looking like something, then you pay a little money and get something that somebody has already put 20 years of work into. And then you carry it forward. You develop it from that point on. I've hit one root. I mean, this is not a bad root, but it's kind of high up. And I'm going to bet that there are better things down below. Same with this one here. It's too high up. I don't need to see a root like this sitting on the surface. I'm looking for bigger fish. Here's a two-pronged root hook, root rake. A little bit less destructive than the three-pronged kind. See the way this all falls away pretty easily? That's because it's dried out. If it was wet, it would all be clumping together, it'd be very messy and heavy. And then as you were pulling it away, it would be tearing roots as it went. This kind of just falls away, falls apart. So it's good. Good to work with the roots dry like this. Of course, you have to be a little protective. You know, as you're drying the plant out in preparation for doing the work, you can't let it get too dry. You don't want the plant to be in agony when you go and do this kind of work to it. But it will go easier for you if you do have the soil dried out. All right, now I'm starting to see this hump here a little bit more clearly. And what I want to know is, how is it formed? What's it made out of? And it appears to be made out of a bunch of smaller roots like this, all kind of massed on top of each other. So, not ideal, but not unusual either. We're just kind of neaten things up as we go. Hopefully we find some bigger stuff underneath the smaller stuff. Places like up here, there's a root that's wound around, and it's thicker than anything I've removed already. It's about the diameter of a pencil. And you have to be careful about something like this because, you know, in the perfect world, we'd take that off because it doesn't look great. And some people say it can be a liability to the plant, that a plant can strangle itself with a root that crosses over like that. I don't know if that's true. I don't know that it's not true. So it's something just to bear in mind. I don't know how well you can see that. It's got a big root that comes out from underneath here somewhere, goes up, crosses completely over, and then another part goes down like this. Not the luckiest find. But you don't know these things. When you go and you pick out a plant that's never had its roots worked on before, you don't know what you're going to find when you dig down. It's one of the hazards of working with this kind of material. And it doesn't matter if it's a camellia or a Japanese maple or whatever else you might find out there. We're going to try to deconstruct it a little bit and see what we get. Because it's not ideal. We'd like to not have it be there. If it doesn't get done now, it'll never get done. And I'll stop, hopefully, at the point where it looks to me like, hey, you know what, if I remove that, what's under there is going to be worse. We're taking away root anyway, so let's take away these that are kind of ugly. One good thing is that, as luck had it, that kind of wound up in the back. This is the front of our plant, and it's actually the better look at the base. So that was a bit of good luck on this.
How do you decide where the base is?
When you see flare and you start to pick up some of these larger sized roots, then you know you're in the area. But at some point, you have to make a call and say, all right, you know, I'm not going to go any deeper than this. This is what I'm going to call the base of the tree for now. And that may change in future years, but you know, what you don't want to do is get to the point where you hit the turntable and say, oh, I guess I should have stopped a little earlier. And it happens, you know, or you see a root and you say, you know, that's bad, badly arranged, and I think I'm going to cut that off, and you cut it, and then when you pull it, like 2/3 of the root mass comes along with it. You say, oh, that was an important root. Let's hope the plant can make do without it. This is, you know, this is not bad. It's not perfect, but what is, you know? If everybody kept perfection as the standard, most of us would be single. We have to learn to accept some things. Being less than perfect. This is one of the founding principles in marriage. And in friendship. In just about everything, you know? It's not a perfect world that we live in. So you look for good enough. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, you know? This is a good tree. Don't tell Blaine I said so, but it's a good tree. And for all the problem of this, it falls in the back, which means it's not that bad of a problem. You know? If you have a fault and you can hide it, that's pretty good. I was driving somewhere recently and I saw this sign. It was up north. I was up north recently. I was driving around and I saw this sign, a billboard on the side of the road, and it's advertising this center. And this center specializes in cosmetic surgery. And they had it all listed there, you know, like getting rid of wrinkles, getting rid of balding spots, stuff for your, you know, your stomach, everything. All the things that people look in the mirror and feel dissatisfied about, this place fixes them for you, you know. You walk in, you pay a bunch of money, they cut here, tuck there, dye this, stretch that, and you come out, what? Better? Poorer. Poorer for sure. It's funny, you know, it's funny. Just, it's easy to put it off as vanity, but I don't know that that really is what it is. It's this sense that there's an ideal, that there's this perfect thing that is supposed to exist. Whether it's, you know, the human form or tree form, dog form, whatever. And this idea that there's some standard of perfection. And then you start looking real critically at things, even yourself, and saying, well, this isn't right, and this isn't what it should be, and this isn't good. And then what? You know? Guess if you have a lot of money, you can go to one of those places and get all kinds of stuff worked on. And if you don't have the money, you can sit at home and feel bad and watch television shows that make you feel worse. Seems like a healthy dose of acceptance would do us all well. I know it does in bonsai. The idea that, you know what, this isn't perfect, but it's not bad. It's not bad. It's good enough. Maybe my next tree will be better. Maybe not. So let me enjoy this one while I'm sitting in front of it. Oh, different colored stuff. I gotta get rid of this. This is all packed, you know? That's gotta be broken up. This is old, not field soil, but decomposed potting mix. Been around a long time. It's broken down. And ultimately, it all needs to be removed. But we can't bare root the plant today. We're not going to do that. But we're going to get rid of a bunch of it. Right? Every time I stab it down with this stick, it's shaking stuff free. And we lose roots, yes, but roots remain, and we're trying to free them up from that old decomposed soil. Soil can wear out. I say soil, and it's not even soil. It's a soilless mix. And around here, the base of most soilless mix is composted pine bark. You go to other places and it's other stuff. But around here, it's mostly composted pine bark, sometimes peat moss. But it can break down over time. That can cause the drainage to be less efficient. It can also cause the soil to not be able to retain nutrients as well. And so refreshing the soil is an important thing in bonsai. And when we repot, it's not just a matter of pruning roots, it's also refreshing the medium, the growing medium. Working off the old stuff to whatever degree you can, and getting new stuff in there. Having jabbed at this and broken it loose, now I'm going back with the scissors and making clean cuts, because roots that have been cut clean are going to be more viable. They have a better chance of living and regrowing without having dieback, as opposed to tearing, you know, roots so that you have kind of ragged ends to them. So the first action is kind of more violent and breaks things up, and then you come back with the scissors and neaten it up. Here again, just making sure this gets loosened. This old stuff, very old, different material too, more sand in this. Earthworm, that's good. No ants, that's good.
When you put that in there for your soil, what do you use for your soil?
Well,
Or your mix, not your soil?
yes. Let's break it into two parts. One part is organic and the other part is mineral or aggregate. The organic part of my mix is composted pine bark and peat moss. Mostly composted pine bark. In bonsai, most people will tell you you have to sift out all the fines in your soil. You take the soil, stand there with a sieve, sift out all the fine stuff. I don't do that. Not with the organic stuff. Peat moss, if you were to sift it, you'd have nothing left, right? Because it's all fines. I don't do that. It's about 4 parts pine bark to 1 part peat. I also add lime because I've had our medium tested, so I know what the pH is. And most plants like the soil to be slightly acidic. Slightly acidic. Neutral is what? Neutral is around 7. Yeah, it's like 6.8, something like that. The lower you are in your pH value, the more acidic the soil is. The higher the pH number, the more alkaline the soil is. Where I live in North Carolina, right, in the mountains, the soil is naturally acidic. And so we have rhododendrons, we have azaleas, we have blueberries grow really well there because those are all ericaceous plants. They're all in the Ericaceae family. This is too. Camellia is a member of the Ericaceae family, meaning it likes an acidic soil. I don't know what your water is like. Water can have effect, and there's water that's alkaline, and there's water that's more acidic. As a measure, I would suggest that when it comes to fertilizing this plant, use an acid fertilizer, like mere acid, or something that's sold like Plant Tone makes an organic fertilizer called Holly-Tone. Hollies are ericaceous plants too. And then that fertilizer will help keep the pH of your potting medium in the right range, acidic. But anyway, I add an appropriate amount of lime based on the testing that we had of our media components to bring the pH to the right level, slightly acidic. Then I take the organic part of the mix and I put it together with the aggregate part, which for us is a product called Stay-Lite Permatil, which is expanded shale. It's made in North Carolina. I think it comes from Salisbury. But they take shale and through a chemical process, they expand it and create porosity so that that shale has the ability to hold on to micro amounts of water. I mix those approximately 50-50, organic and mineral, 50-50. But you have to understand that every plant, I alter that just a little bit. Say it's a juniper. Junipers happen to grow better in alkaline soil, so I add a little bit more lime. Azaleas like a more organic mix, so I don't add as much of the aggregate, and I add less lime. But my basic, down the middle soil mix is just what I described to you.
What size aggregate?
Now here's the thing, I said before we don't sift any of the organics, and that's true. Except with this caveat, you know, when I get the Nature's Helper, we buy it from a sawmill, and it's very rough, and so I have to sift out these big chunks, right, because I don't want that. So I'll use like a 1/4-inch screen, and anything that sits on top of the 1/4-inch screen I throw out, but most of it goes right through. The aggregate I have pre-sifted, which costs a lot of money, but sifting is really unpleasant to do and takes a lot of time, so I pay. And I get it in two sizes. And one size is about 1/8 of an inch, and the other size is about 1/4 of an inch. The larger size I use for things that are being trained. If you look in that box later, you can see the mix I'm using for that stage of development, which is the training development, right? Training stage. And there you use a coarse mix because it allows the roots to move through it more efficiently, more quickly. When you have a plant that's developed and you're trying to kind of ride the brake on it and keep it more or less like it is, although we all know that isn't possible. It has to grow, it has to change. But you're trying to keep that rate of change as small as possible. You use a finer mix because the roots will move through it more slowly, and that helps slow down the rest of the plant's development. This plant, what do we have to put it in?
Back in its original,
I mean media.
Right there in it.
right there in the,
So just trash
not
it.
catching.
What do we got? This is pretty coarse, and that's good. See, chunks this size, if you're potting a nice refined bonsai, you don't want chunks this big in your potting mix, generally speaking. But at this stage of the game, it's good. And then it looks like there's turface in here
Turquoise and granite.
and granite. That's good. Yeah, that's a basic kind of mix. Trouble is, we'd like to make this half the size. I have a knife. I don't know if it'll work on this. Again, I wish I had my reciprocating saw here. Let's see what we got. Boy, what a mess. Glad I'm a guest. Yeah, this stuff is really
We
thick.
could,
Whoa. How many of you are waiting for me to slip and slice my leg? Yeah, put your finger right there. Let's make this really interesting. The demo that no one could forget. Bonsai by Sam Peckinpah.
chainsaw bonsai.
Want to try another knife?
Almost there. Okay. Good. All right, so, you know, I took an awful lot of root away from this, but look, if we were trying to get into this pot, like another half of what's there would have to come off. So, this is enough for tonight. A lot was removed, a lot remains, but it's a start. And the work will continue as we go down the line. Now, we got to do something to keep stuff from just flowing out the bottom of this.
Screens there.
I think I brought some with me, so we'll see. Maybe we can get away with not having to fill in the side ones. There was something else I was going to bring, and I bet I didn't bring it.
How about some polyethylene? Garbage bag cut.
You want something to...
The drainage would be helpful.
Oh,
We'd like it to drain, we just don't want it to.
drain all over the floor.
I didn't bring it. If you go into Lowe's or Home Depot, they have the tape that drywall hangers use. And that's really good for this kind of application.
Oh, yeah.
Could we put this in
Yeah,
squares
we'll do it.
and lean it in front of
Yeah,
it?
we have to do something, because otherwise it'll leak
We
soil.
may have something out in the car, some.
Well, we have the same thing that Mary's using.
No, we're good.
Okay,
We'll
we
move
got it,
on.
got enough.
Thank you. Would somebody like to lead us in a song, maybe, to help pass the time? What do you think Blaine's doing right now?
I think he probably has
Eating.
luau drink.
Somebody said.
A luau drink.
Something with an umbrella stuff in it.
Yeah, he's got a drink with a pink umbrella in it, and he's playing shuffleboard.
Not enough to pop.
getting hustled by someone from Florida. Okay, and there, now I gotta do the things to fix it in. So you know this deal here, sometimes referred to as a butterfly. It's the little doodad you make to hold the wire, to hold the mesh screen in place. All right. You don't have to make it like this. You can just make a U, you know, like a staple, and that'll work too. But one of the things when I went to Japan, like the guy was teaching me, like he made a big deal out of this. He said, "Do you know how to do it?" And I said, "Yes." And I went and I did it. He said, "No." He showed me. It looked exactly the same. So I did it again. He said, "No." I said, "All right.
They have to say no. No.
What's wrong with this one?" He said, "Look at mine. Look at yours." And I looked, and I was like, "No, I'm supposed to learn something from this."
Was he from Canada?
No. No, he was the real deal. He was from Japan. That's the thing that gets me about these people who are really, really hung up on it. Hey, it's got to be done this way, you know, and it's the Japanese way. It's got to be done like this. This is the right way. If it's not done like this, it's not bonsai. That's what they're saying. And I think, well, it's a strange thing, you know, because the people who are saying this, they're raised in places like Pennsylvania and you know, Virginia, and it's like, how did you get to be Japanese? You know? And why are you so fixated on them and what they do? What makes them perfect? They're the ones who invented it. Well, no, they're not actually. Well, they're the ones who perfected it. Oh, it's all perfected? It's done? I never heard of an art that's done. That's not the way art works. You know, when something reaches the point where it's done, where everything's been figured out, and you can just follow a step-by-step thing and get to that, that's not art. That's not what art does. That's, I don't know what to call that. It's something other. You know? That has the same relationship to art as paint by numbers do. It makes a pretty picture. All figured out. These are just my opinions, by the way.
We're weighing them.
That's good. That's exactly right. But I'll tell you, I've gone and I've spoken at places where people have challenged things like this that I just said to you. Where people have insulted me from the audience and told me I don't know what I'm talking about. Because I don't do it the way that they do it, you know, or the way that their teacher taught them to do it. And it's a hard thing to have somebody insult you, you know, and not say anything back. Because I'm a guest and all, and you can't really, you know.
Fist fight with my back.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm a professional. But truly, one time I did a program, and at the end of it, this fella said, and he didn't come up and talk to me afterwards. He came up, I mean, from where he was sitting, and he said, "Well, you know, you seem like a reasonably bright guy. I'm sure if you stay with it long enough, you'll finally get it." And I said, "Get what?" What bonsai is all about. That's what he said. And even though I've returned to that place every year for like the past 10 years, he's never come back.
He didn't get it.
He's actually very good. He's very good at bonsai. I don't take anything away from what he does. But, you know, there's one way to do it. The right way. And everything else is an aberration. Something misguided. So please take that into account, that everything I've told you is suspect. And that maybe the safest thing would be to just forget it. Don't do what I do.
Put a disclaimer on your business cards.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. Oh.
See, I learned eventually. It's just slow. This soil is bone dry, which is also good. But it's good because it'll fill in easy. There are lots of little crevices now, little spaces all around the roots where the soil was knocked out before. This fine, fine chopstick was given to me by Mary last year. It's in my kit now, and I use it all the time. It's an excellent chopstick. Thank you. I wish it wasn't made out of bamboo, but if it was only white oak.
I can go for cherry myself.
So the object of this is to try to introduce soil into those cavities. We don't want roots surrounded by air for obvious reasons. So, having created all kinds of voids in the way that we deconstructed the root ball, we're obliged to try to make sure that they all get backfilled. But you don't want to do too much of this, because if you're haphazard about it, you can just be continually destructing the root ball. The main thing, the most important thing, is that this has to get soaked. Really soaked. And when this soil is dry like this, it can sometimes be very difficult to get it to take on moisture. So really, the best way to go about it, if you have a tub large enough, like one of those tubs they sell for changing oil, you fill it with water, sit this down in it overnight, and let it just soak water up all night long. There's only so much airspace in here. And so when the plant becomes saturated, you can't add any more water. It'll just run out the bottom, right? So there's no danger in soaking a plant overnight. You're not going to hurt it one bit. And it's very important to make sure that there are no dry spots inside of the root ball, because if they're drying now, they'll stay dry. And you'll be checking the soil moisture, and you'll be checking this top inch here. And meanwhile, down in the heart of it, dry as a bone, and then you see the plant starting to fail, and you say, God, that guy didn't know anything. He killed that plant. All right, another way to get the soil to go into those holes is through vibration. If it's too heavy to pick up like that, you get a rubber mallet, tap it all around, and that vibration will cause things to shake down inside. You'll notice I didn't do any wiring, and that was not a mistake on my part. It was because there's no need to wire anything right now. I do want this at a different angle. The wiring is stressful for the plant too. So I think this plant has been through enough stress for tonight. It needs to unwind. It needs to relax. We should send it on a cruise. One thing I stopped doing a while back, but now I've started doing it again, is to go ahead and seal big cuts. This is Japanese toothpaste. Or maybe it's hemorrhoidal ointment. I don't know. It's written in Japanese. Who knows what this is?
Why did you change what you do?
Because I doubted and I experimented, and I found on at least a couple of occasions that the plants produced the callus and covered over seemingly faster with the paste than without.
I have less dieback in our climate. I started out doing a lot of Japanese maples, and when I did not use the sealant like this, not cut paste, but sealant, I got a lot more dieback on limbs.
The evidence is all anecdotal, which means, you know, you don't know if it's really accurate or not.
The mileage may vary.
Yeah, but I mean, this isn't that expensive, so using it is not, you know, a major financial concern. It doesn't hurt anything, I'm pretty sure. So if it helps, great. And if it doesn't help, well.
Would you use as a regular sealant?
Like what?
You can get the pruning stuffies.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters too much what it is, as long as it doesn't have something toxic in it. You know, like
RTV or something you wouldn't use.
or you know, some people use like on big trees they'll paint it with enamel paint. I can imagine it's good. It's like when they used to castrate the pigs on the farm, they would use kerosene. I'm sure that helped.
But last year, everybody was saying, don't use sealant.
Yeah. Well, you know, the plant will cover the wounds on its own without it. As I said, I think I've seen evidence that they do it more readily with it. So that's why I've gone back to using it. I don't use it on everything. I don't use it on pines. I don't use it on ficus, because those things ooze so much that they have to be sealing themselves. But other things like maples, I think it does help. I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.